Welcome, everyone, to our discussion today on a new book, Security, Strategy, and Military Dynamics in the South China Sea. My name is Jia Wang. I'm the interim director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. I'm so pleased to welcome many authors of this edited volume from North America, Asia, and Europe to share their insights with us live. You can find a link to the book in our chat a little later in the program. Today's event is organized by the China Institute with the support of the Institute of China-America Studies. The China Institute is China's only research think tank focusing solely on China studies, with strive to generate and disseminate knowledge that supports in-depth understanding of today's China and encourage policy development in response to China's evolving role in the world. Security and governance issues of the South China Sea and the Arctic is an important area of studies our institute continues to focus on. We're so proud to be the sponsor of this important book project and would like to congratulate and also thank our colleagues, Professor Gordon Holden, Dr. Nong Hong, and Dr. Scott Ramniuk for their great efforts as editors and contributors. I would also like to thank all the authors for their contribution to this book. The South China Sea is one of the most volatile, contested, yet strategically important region where many nation states and non-state actors within the region and beyond have significant vested interests. This edited volume brings together over 24 international experts to provide a wide range of thoughtful and diverse perspectives on geopolitical concerns in the South China Sea. We will open today's event with a round of brief presentations by 7 authors, followed by a moderated discussion and Q&A. We encourage our audience members to submit your questions, I'm sure there will be many, using the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to as many as possible, as many of your questions as possible. This event will be recorded and the recording will be made available to you shortly. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce our moderator, also my mentor and boss and close colleague for the past 10 years, Professor Gordon Holden. Professor Holden is the Director Emeritus of the China Institute. Gordon has also been at the helm of the China Institute since 2008. Prior to that, he had an esteemed career serving over 30 years, including various leadership positions in the Canadian Foreign Service. Now I would like to turn the virtual floor over to Gordon. Gordon.
Thank you very much, Jo. I would like to note that I was her mentor and boss. I'm now the Director Emeritus, and Ja is running the China Institute and doing a very good job of it. It's now my job, though, to introduce the large number of speakers who will be speaking in sequence. And I would remind each of you to keep your remarks to 5 minutes to allow us to preserve the Q&A period. Beginning, first will speak will be Nong Hong, Executive Director, Institute for China-America Studies. I'm going to read everyone's name, and then we'll go back individually to Nong. Then will be Scott Romaniuk, Postdoc Fellow of the China Institute, University of Alberta. Stein Tonneson, Research Professor, Peace Research Institute, Oslo, Norway. Rommel Banloy, President of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies of the Philippines. John Callahan, Dean of School of Graduate and Professional Studies, New England College in the US. Yang Li, Assistant President of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies in China. Sriva Gupta, Senior Fellow, Institute of China-America Studies in Washington. And Yang Song, Board Member of the Chinese Taiwan Society of International Law in Taipei. Please, Nong, I'd invite you to begin speaking.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Jia. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to everyone. It has been a great experience working with Gordon, Scott, and other 23 authors who contributed to this volume. They are all well-known scholars and experts on the South China Sea. However, due to the limited time and the very complicated time zones today, so we decided to only bring in 8 authors for today's discussion. I personally consider today's book talk as a very good opportunity to reconnect with many of the friends and colleagues who have been working on the South China Sea issues for a very long time. This book proposal was initiated in late 2019, 3 years after the South China Sea Award was rendered. So we observed carefully what happened in 2019 in terms of the South China Sea development. So we observed the differences and the disputes between China and other claimant states remain under control. And however, on the other hand, we also observe the unilateral actions by respective claimants is still a major factor for instability and uncertainty in this region. And we also observe the COC negotiation has concluded the first reading of a single text ahead of schedule and ending to the second reading. And then the South China issue has gone much beyond only the dispute among the littoral states over the sovereignty and the maritime jurisdiction. And it has become a geopolitical trap in the competition between the major powers and also in the restructure of the regional order in Asia Pacific. In the same year, and we see more and more free navigation conducted initially by the US in the South China Sea, which is unprecedented in terms of its frequency and substance. And also in the same year, we see the European Union and some of its member states are making increasing high-profile presence in the South China Sea. So under this background, this book proposal was initiated among Gordon, Scott, and myself, and luckily we got our 23 authors on board. Thank you again. So what made this book a little different for the existing literature? Last week, I was asked by a very good of mine and a very good of all of you, I think, who is a well-known international lawyer in this field. And he asked me, why there were so few lawyers among all the authors in this book. So the purpose of this volume is to bring together the conceptual approach to security with the empirical study of different parties and their political and military gesture towards the South China Sea. So we hoped to add to the existing literature regarding security interests and also strategies of many major players in the South China Sea. So each author of the chapter is asked to address the same question. What are the political, economic, and military goals and tactics and strategy of the major claimants and non-claimant states concerning the South China Sea? What policies have been formulated and implemented in support of each player's geopolitical pursuit in the South China Sea? And the last question, to what extent have the parties engaged in military buildup, reorganization based on their interests in this region? So this volume is composed of 18 chapters, including 2 introductory chapters, which Scott will explain later in his remark. And then we cover 4 parts, which address the respective perspective. First, we have a part on claimants of contested South China Sea. That's where we bring in the Charter of China and also Taiwan's role, and Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia. And the second part cover on the non-claimants in the Southeast Asia, where we bring the Charter of Singapore, Indonesia, which is not a considered party to the spot list, and also Cambodia and ASEAN perspective. And the third part, we try to bring in the 4 Quad countries like the US, Australia, India, Japan, to look at their views on this issue. And the last part, we try to bring in as many as possible the non-claimants in Europe and Eurasia, where we bring the chapter of UK, Russia, and South Korea. So this volume's chapter present some level of engagement and interaction with one another. So we submit this manuscript in late 2020, so after 9 months, and we still see the finding in this book strong, relevant, and the argument remain consolidated. So to look into the future, we identify, at least from my end, identify the future development of the South China Sea in 4 categories of relationship. First, among the claimants, the second, between the claimants and the external stakeholders, and the third, among the external stakeholders like the Quad and the recent alliance of AUKUS. And then last but not the least, the most critical and challenging factor, which is I consider as the US-China relations in the South China Sea are getting more tense at a time of general breakdown in overall US-China relations. I'm going to stop there and looking forward to hear our author's view on the development in the South China Sea. Back to you, Gordon. Gordon, you are muted.
All right. Thank you for staying on time, Nong, and yet covering the essential structure of the book. I'd like to pass now directly to Scott. Over to you, Scott. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, everybody, and good morning. Thank you for the introduction and for putting the structure of that book out there for us. To carry that forward, I'd like to draw our attention to 2 chapters in particular. Those would be the 2 chapters that I have co-authored at the beginning. This offers a framing for the book, not a theoretical framing as such, but offering theoretical insights into how we can frame the issues, the substantive issues that take place in the South China Sea. The first chapter that sets out to accomplish this is co-authored with my colleague Tobias Bergers at Keio University in Japan. And we draw our attention to the various states, principally China, Vietnam, Taiwan, Philippines, Brunei, and Malaysia, all making different claims, overlapping claims to parts of the South China Sea. And we see, in particular, we draw our attention to aggressive Chinese foreign and security policy in South China Sea, with new oil rigs, newly built militarized islands and coral reef, sunken boats, declared islands, and Coast Guard clashes. And these actions not only increase the political tensions in the region, as have actions by all the states to some degree or another, but they've also increased the military and political tensions and set out to establish a test case for how the rest of East Asia and Southeast Asia might respond to a rising China. And we point to the idea that rather than using military naval assets purely and exclusively, all nations involved have opted to use Coast Guard and national fishing ships, fishers, a strategy less likely to lead to direct military escalation, but still military skirmishes nonetheless. We also establish a second theoretical framing chapter with my colleague Joshua Hasty at Regent University. And in doing so, we look at the South China Sea as a so-called system of systems rather than a single monolithic security system. And in this, what we set out to see is that we want to highlight that the vested interest in maintaining a military presence and the protection of what various states perceive to be their assets in areas falling within their national boundaries has become more and more prominent in foreign security policies in the South China Sea. We also apply the view of spectacular economic growth and potential for economic growth among claimant states and indeed non-claimant states as well, coupled with newly developed soft power capabilities and renewed tensions with the United States. And we put out a speculation over a looming Thucydides trap, triggering an armed conflict between principally the United States and China as 2 very dominant actors in the region, with the potential to drag multiple states into this escalating conflict. And so while concerns are raised by Sino-American competition deserving of attention, we have to highlight that they don't exist in a vacuum. And this is one of the things that this volume sets out to achieve. Rather, each competitor's range of maneuvers is shaped by the broader security structure in and around the SCS and even beyond the South China Sea specifically. So in this chapter, we explore various security structures of the South China Sea, rather than seeing it as a single security structure, both as context for ongoing competition between Washington and Beijing on one hand, and as a complex system of states whose interests shape and constrain the behavior of other major powers vying for primacy in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate that timely explanation of the structure and the reasons behind it. We'll now turn to Sir Tonninson. Professor Tonninson, please.
Thank you very much. I have 5 minutes, so I thought it was also good to have 5 points. My first point is that something I also write in the preface to the book, and that is that the publication of this book is an expression of a very positive trend around the South China Sea, which I have observed for the last 10, 20 years. And this is a growing quality and growing interaction in research among scholars in all the claimant countries and also elsewhere in the world concerning the South China Sea. We have become a kind of intellectual tribe who thrive together, and I see this book as a tremendous expression of that trend. Let me also say that it was published shortly after another book, the Routledge Handbook on the South China Sea, and whereas this book has its main emphasis, as Nong Hong said, on security strategy and military dynamics, the other book has a more representative of the other trend, which is the legal approach. My second point is something that comes out very clearly in many of the chapters in the book, and that is that in the South China Sea we have 2 slightly overlapping strategic rivalries. One, the dominant one perhaps, is between China and the United States. And we may say that China has built up its capacity, its hardware, so much now that it has something that approaches sea control in peacetime. But the United States is still more forceful globally. So if it concentrated its forces in the South China Sea, it would be likely to prevail over China in a wartime confrontation. The other strategic rivalry is between China and the other claimant states. And in that competition, China is clearly dominating and increasing its military domination all the time through various kinds of advances militarily. My third point is that at the same time as we have seen this development of a steadily sharper strategic rivalry along both of the dimensions I just described, we have also seen a legal polarization. And this is a legal polarization which has tended to isolate China. China has radicalized and become much more precise than before about its legal claims in the South China Sea. And it has done this in ways that are clearly in contradiction to the legal premises of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, which will have its 40th anniversary next year. China has done this mainly on 3 points, and the first is to say that the small islets in the Spratlys, Paracels, Pratas, and Scarborough Shoal have a right to maritime zones beyond territorial sea. That means exclusive economic zones and continental shelves. The other is that these small islets do not just have that right in their own as small islets, but they form archipelagos, which has rights as archipelagos. And the third point where China has radicalized its position and made it more precise is that it claims historical rights within almost the whole of the South China Sea, marked by the famous U-shaped line. While China has radicalized its claims, the ASEAN claimants have more or less converged around very similar positions based on the Law of the Sea Convention, and which are in direct conflict with China's claims on all those 3 points, and with a much better basis legally in the United Nations Convention. This was my third point. My fourth point is a commentary on particularly one of the chapters, which is the one by Scott Romaniuk and Tobias Burgers, where the central metaphor is salami slicing. In this chapter, the claim is that China is increasing its power all the time. In the past, it used to be called creeping assertiveness. And it's increasing its military power. It's establishing artificial islands, bases in the Spratlys and Paracels, and therefore gradually building its control and taking more and more of the salami sausage. I think this is a solid metaphor which shows clearly the tendency for China to move its positions forward all the time gradually, without risking a direct conflict with either the United States or any of the claimant states. But I have one question about the metaphor, and that is the inherent assumption that increasing your hard power also means increasing your power in general. My suggestion is that China may isolate itself from possible allies and provoke its neighbor countries to align themselves with the United States and the new alliance it has formed with Australia and in the East Indo-Pacific and Britain, and that China is not able, through its salami slicing, to increase its soft power, but instead is isolating itself. One other expression of this is also the attitudes in Taiwan, which have been deeply affected by China's behavior in Hong Kong. So that was my fourth point. The fifth point is simply that I want to heartily congratulate Gordon Holden, Scott Romaniuk, and Nong Hong with having edited a superb and truly informative, interesting volume with multiple perspectives on the South China Sea. And I would also like to congratulate all the chapter authors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stein, and I really appreciate also your comment and question actually to, I think, probably to Scott and perhaps to one of the Chinese panelists. And we'll perhaps put that aside for the session, the Q&A session that follows, but I think that we should address the question you've posed. I'd now like to turn to Rommel, please. My friend Rommel, this floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Allow me first to congratulate all my friends for the publication of this volume, especially our editors, Gordon, Scott, and Nong. This book is very timely in the light of the most recent developments in the South China Sea, involving not only claimants and littoral states, but also other external user states, particularly major powers. To be more current, let me begin by mentioning the trilateral arrangement of Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States, or AUKUS, as it adds to the complexity of the South China Sea disputes. If not effectively managed through open dialogues, consultations, and even negotiations, the AUKUS can heighten major power competition and disrupt planned cooperation in the South China Sea. But for me, from a Filipino perspective, there are three major factors affecting the current state and future direction of the South China Sea, affecting the Philippine foreign and security policy towards this issue. The first factor is unilateralism. Unilateral actions, not only military and paramilitary activities, but as well as economic and development activities in the South China Sea of claimants and other stakeholders, are heightening current security tensions. If not regulated through common understanding and mutual respect, unilateralism can aggravate actions and reaction dynamics that can fuel more suspicions and can raise the risk of miscalculations and even error in judgment that can lead to violent accident and worse, unintended armed confrontation in the South China Sea. But there is an antidote to unilateralism, which is cooperation that can be pursued through bilateral or multilateral approaches. The bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea between the Philippines and China, an example of bilateral method to uphold cooperation in the South China Sea through consultations in order to build confidence and promote preventive diplomacy in the South China Sea. the ongoing discussion on the code of conduct in the South China Sea between China and members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is an excellent example of multilateral method to prevent armed conflicts and pursue regional cooperation in the South China Sea through negotiation. There's a strong need to sustain these bilateral and multilateral approaches in order to constantly champion confidence building and preventive diplomacy in the South China Sea. The second factor is popular nationalism, which also encourages unilateralism and assertiveness of states involved in the South China Sea disputes. Though nationalism is very important to guard each other's sovereignty, sovereign rights, and even national interests in the South China Sea, it must be pursued reasonably in order to be cognizant and protective of regional and global interests. The South China Sea is not only an issue of national interest that should be pursued selfishly, ethnocentrically, and egoistically by states. The South China Sea is also an issue of regional security and world peace. Thus, popular nationalism must be balanced and moderated by regionalism and internationalism through the advancement not only of individual national interests, but through the pursuance of shared national interests, common regional interests, and even converging international interests. To use the words of President Xi Jinping, we need to build a community of shared future for mankind, and this applies to the South China Sea. We can share the resources of the South China Sea through joint development, regional maritime cooperation, and even pursuance of effective global ocean governance. Finally, the third factor is the involvement of extra-regional powers. Military actions of major powers in the South China Sea, like those, and even some provocative military activities in the South China Sea by major powers are worsening security anxieties of states. They also heighten major power competitions, particularly with China, that exacerbate the security predicament of smaller states. Because of UCOS and other military activities of major powers, the South China Sea is becoming a playground of major power competitions that put smaller states like the Philippines in a difficult and problematic situation. So to peacefully manage conflict in the South China Sea, it is imperative for major powers to increase their involvements in bilateral and multilateral dialogues and consultations that aim to promote cooperation rather than military competition, especially in the areas already identified in the DOC and being negotiated in the COC. These areas are marine environmental research, marine environmental protection, safety of navigation and communication at sea, search and rescue operations, and combating transnational crimes, including international terrorism. So rather than divide claimants and littoral states in the South China Sea through provocative military activities, major powers like UCOS can instead unite all players and stakeholders through productive non-military initiatives like supporting efforts to build regional maritime economy and infrastructure connectivity in the South China Sea. Though the Philippines is considered a friend of UCOS by being the oldest Asian military ally of the United States, a close security partner of Australia, where we have a visiting forces agreement also like the United States, and a strategic distant friend of the United Kingdom, Manila continues to value its centuries-old friendship with China. The Philippines and China are currently pursuing comprehensive strategic cooperation in various areas, including the South China Sea. AUKUS and other major powers can support rather than disrupt this effort by building a new model of relationship with China that upholds the principle of duty to cooperate in the South China Sea. The duty to cooperate is not only a moral obligation, but also a political requirement mandated by international laws, particularly the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. The duty to cooperate and not military competition should define the current state and future direction of the South China Sea disputes. That's all for now. Thank you very much. Sheshe and mabuhay.
Thank you, Rommel, for your comments. And just a comment to all of the attendees. There is a link posted in the chat function that leads you directly to the book at the Bristol University Press. I'd now like to invite John Callahan to speak. John, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, sir. And congratulations to my fellow co-authors and the editing team. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I think that the U.S. involvement and position in the South China Sea, obviously we're not a claimant, we're an external player, but one with significant interest due to trade and the huge importance of the South China Sea region strategically and economically. The U.S. Primary involvement in the region in the last 20 years has been through freedom of navigation exercises. I'm speaking militarily. Freedom of navigation exercises designed to assert the free flow of commerce and shipping through the region. And that's been done with not Coast Guard forces, but with US Navy warships as frequently and as often as possible, along with overflights of aircraft from the continental United States, as well as from other bases in the region. So the US clearly is seeking a containment of Chinese expansion in the region, but also in neighboring regions, and they all fit together. The South China Sea is really, really important if you want to protect the flank of Taiwan and ultimately Japan, for example, or if you want to defend the approaches to Australia, or if you want to defend the Straits of Malacca. Pick an area, and there is a critical strait somewhere in the South China Sea that becomes very, very important. So in the past decades, the U.S. has not only sought to sort of increase its footprint in the area and to show the flag where needed, but has also sought strategic depth. And I'm speaking primarily of the move of U.S. forces into Australia. That new alliance has been a long time in coming. Actually, if you think back, it's been almost 10 years since President Obama decided on the pivot to Asia. Unfortunately, within weeks after he announced the pivot to Asia, the Arab Spring began, and there's a saying in strategy that the enemy gets a vote, and so the buildup in Asia was not what it could have been because of other regions in the world that became a very big deal very quickly. So the U.S. Has always pursued two types of alliance in Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. It's quite different from Europe, and we know about NATO, and NATO was relatively easy to build back in the 40s because of one common threat and a group of allies with very common interests. And the main problem player having just been defeated, meaning Germany. In Asia, it's quite different, and the U.S. Often has pursued bilateral approaches because of the big Second World War enemy, Japan, continues to be problematic in terms of alliance building. That's only recently starting to change. But the point is, the U.S. has had to pursue a spoke and hub approach with a series of bilateral alliances. Now, this new alliance with Australia and Great Britain, I mean, it sort of fits both sides, right? I mean, bringing in the UK from outside the region and allying with Australia, I mean, that's still sort of a bilat in terms of the region, but it could form the basis of a broader series of alliances. I don't think there will ever be a NATO in the region, but the more assertive the People's Republic of China is, and the more concerned the neighboring countries get, then the opportunities for cooperation increase. So last thing, because I prefer the Q&A part and to facilitate that. Last point, the new administration, the Biden administration, has only been in office for 6 months or so, but has not changed its stance incredibly from the Trump administration in terms of freedom of navigation exercises and the statements of support for our partners in the region for moving forward. So I say that because sometimes when an administration changes, the adjustments are radical, but in this case, not yet, although it's early. So that's my basic comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing the comments of the other authors and the question and answer. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, John, and for your succinct and timely remarks. We'll now shift to Yang Li, please.
Okay, thank you, Gordon, and good morning or good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My topic is about actually it's my observations on China's perceived security interests in the South China Sea and the strategies it currently adopts. And due to the limited time and length, my article in this book, which was completed more than a year ago, is far from being comprehensive and well done, and might not be quite updated. But as Honong said, maybe some of my observations might still be valid. Anyway, it only represents my preliminary effort to try to identify certain features of China's policies and the behavior in the South China Sea. And of course, the views in this chapter, as well as what I say today, are my personal views. And my major findings are as follows. First, maybe let's look at China's perceived security interests in the South China Sea. And I found that they are multidimensional against the background that China's leadership has been taking a holistic approach toward China's national security since at latest the year 2014. And the perceived security interests of China in the South China Sea might be composed of 5 elements. The first, and on the top of its agenda, is China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and jurisdiction in the South China Sea, and which are to a different extent contested by other South China Sea coastal states. And the second one is a peaceful and stable external environment, which is conducive to the country's development. And a critical part of that environment is keeping amicable and cooperative relations with its neighboring countries and trying to avoid wars or major chaos at China's doorstep. And the third element is homeland security, which means that the South China Sea is taken as a buffer zone or protective zone for China to defend its mainland from any foreign invasion or attack from the sea. And the fourth is security and safety of sea routes of communication in the South China Sea, and which is considered to be a bridge for China to develop its trade and other contacts with the outside world. And the fifth is the use of South China Sea as a testing ground for China's maritime power building, compatible with the rise of China to be a global power and its increasing stake in ocean governance, both in the regional waters and the world seas at large. And next, with regard to China's current South China Sea strategies, I think they might contain 4 elements. First piece of that element is to keep the disputes as they are and try to put them under control. Specifically, under the circumstances that the disputes will not be settled in the foreseeable future, China intends to prevent the occupation of its features by other countries from being legitimized. And it also concerns about that no more features are taken and the disputes will not be expanded to the undisputed areas. And any moves by other countries which may cause those effects or go in that direction are quite likely to trigger China's corresponding reactions, both diplomatically or maybe some actions on the sea. And secondly, China is trying to practice a dual-track approach together with Southeast Asian countries to solve and manage the disputes, respectively through bilateral channels with the claimants and through regional institutions, including the dialogues with ASEAN member states regarding the implementation of DOC, carrying out maritime cooperation and also negotiation on the COC. Third is to manage differences with the United States and other extra-regional powers. The specific goals under this element is that I think China is trying to keep those powers from meddling into the South China Sea disputes and also avoid misperceptions and misjudgments so as to prevent the competition or confrontation, particularly between China and the United States, from escalating into military conflicts and clashes, and ensure that China is prepared for any worst scenarios at all times. The fourth is that to use the South China Sea as a theater for Chinese military to build its fascist forces. Actually, that effort is among China's strategic design to transform its naval strategies from a focus on offshore waters defense to a combination of offshore waters defense with open seas protection. Generally speaking, I found that China's strategies toward the South China Sea are not static, but they're rather dynamic. And the major theme is to keep a balance between safeguarding its territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and maintaining a stable and friendly external environment. And both goals are critical for China's overall national security. And in addition, China's maritime power building process and its increasing participation in global maritime affairs also serve as important factors shaping China's perceptions and strategies toward the South China Sea. And I will conclude here. Thank you, and look forward to the discussion, questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yang Li, for those comments. You brought up several issues I think we can come right back at in the Q&A session when we reach that point. And actually, we're spot on time. We're even a little bit ahead. I'll now turn then to Saurabh Gupta, please.
Thank you, Gordon, for the opportunity to speak. My chapter in the book is about India and the South China Sea. But what I will be speaking here today is in context of the Quad and the South China Sea. Now, there wasn't a chapter on the Quad and the South China Sea, but let me construct the role of the Quad as a group in the South China Sea and speak to that. What is the Quad, first of all? I would submit, the Quad has its inspiration in the Tsunami Core Group, which took shape in an ad hoc fashion in 2004-2005 at the time of that terrible tsunami in Southeast Asia. And an American diplomat who was the American lead on the Quad actually phrased this very well later on when he said that the Tsunami Core Group was an organization that never met in one of diplomacy's storied cities, never issued a communique, never created a secretariat, and took as one of its successes its own demise. The core group was an example of a new style of diplomacy, one which requires actions and put a premium on creating new friends and allies and fostering new coalitions that can be pulled together simply because they're the ones with the resources and the desire to act effectively and quickly. I think that is, in a way, the animating purpose of the Quad, although, all these things China could have also done as part of the Tsunami Core Group, but it wasn't invited to it. Separate question, separate issue. We'll get to that later. But the main point is that the Tsunami Core Group essentially, the Quad essentially aspires to be an ad hoc coordinating mechanism, which is composed of democracies built around a functional agenda of four-way mutual interest, and which confers significant public goods value to the region. In its latest avatars, I'd say from 2018 onwards, it's taken on a more structured personality. Which essentially being a consultative forum of democracies that promotes the goal of a free I'd say, which is defined by what it is and is not. What it is, it says, consultative forum of democracies, promotes goal of a free and open Indo-Pacific, free of coercion, free of intimidation, free of economic retaliation. And it is also defined by what it is not, which is a security alliance, an Asian NATO, or a formal institution. Fundamentally, at bottom, though, I'd say the Quad is essentially a maritime construct, and whether it can grow a non-maritime and non-military role still remains to be seen, and I have some skepticism about it. Anyway, Quad aside, the introduction of the Quad aside, what is the role of the Quad as a group in the South China Sea, in the context of the South China Sea? And I would actually submit that the role of the Quad might be great in the long run as a hard and soft balancing blue water option, but it has a very marginal role to play in the geopolitics of the South China Sea, which is essentially the near seas. And the reason for this being that what you do in blue water balancing, the capabilities that you bring are not the capabilities that you can bring to bear and effect change or effect a change in China's calculus with regard to many of the sovereign rights issues, I mean, territoriality and sovereignty linked issues in the South China Sea, which are very different from the blue water features. And in this regard, I would submit that the Quad is essentially, it isn't even a Quad, it's a 3+1 arrangement. And just to to kind of emblematically emphasize this, let me explain 3+1 in terms of India being that one. You know, as soon as the arbitration award was announced in 2016, India immediately shot out its position with regard to the arbitration which was that all parties should show utmost respect to the to UNCLOS, which is the legal order of the seas. And it did not say anything beyond in terms of this is final, this is binding, and this has to be observed, and this is international law. India has ceased to have this language in its diplomatic communiques since, I would say, 2017 or maybe 2018. Meantime, Australia, Japan, and the United States emphasize the point of final, binding, this is international law, and it's repeated in every joint statement and AUSMIN, a trilateral or a bilateral statement. And this effectively itself is emblematic of the difference between where India comes in on the Quad and where the other three countries come in with regard to their approaches on the Quad. The one last final point I would make is that within the last 5 to 7 years, there has been a very impressive institutionalization of the alliance structures in the Western Pacific. You know, Mr. Abe put forward his constitutional reinterpretation, which was then the basis for many of the new update in the defense, US-Japan defense guidelines. With regard to Australia, Japan, they're on the verge of signing a reciprocal access agreement, which will then open the door for Japan to provide logistical support to Australian forces in the context of what Japan calls an important influence situation on its security. And a South China Sea contingency could effectively be that. And Australia is only the second country of the US where Japan is making this arrangement, where Australia will have visiting forces. Essentially, Australia will have forces based in the theater. Japan will support those forces, and Japan will provide logistical support to Australian forces in the context of a contingency. So impressive institutionalization and impressive tightening of these arrangements. These have all happened in the past 7 years. And has this had any effect whatsoever on anything that China has done in the South China Sea? And if this has had no effect, essentially, or a marginal effect, why do you think that even further institutionalization, such as AUKUS, which will have important impact in terms of blue water balancing, will have that same impact in the South China Sea? And therefore, let me leave it at that. I can take questions later, but the essential point is that the Quad is getting its act together, but its role as a functional actor in the South China Sea as a group is very limited, if not marginal. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I think, again, everyone has stayed on time. To my surprise, it's actually put us a little bit further ahead. I will now turn to Sonya Hue, please.
Well, good morning and good evening. Director Wang, Professor Holden, and Dr. Hong for inviting me to, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this virtual book talk. The chapter I contributed is about Taiwan's South China Sea policy under the Tsai Ing-wen administration. As all of you know, Taiwan is one of the claimants in the South China Sea regarding territory and maritime rights. However, due to the sensitive political issues, Taiwan has been excluded from participating in regional efforts to manage the disputes in the sea. Taiwan has also been barred from engaging in maritime cooperation and ocean governance talks between China and ASEAN member states. Taiwan was not invited to sign the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, and has been kept outside of the ASEAN-China consultation on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. Due to worsened cross-strait relations, the talk between Beijing and Taipei on the South China Sea related issues and possible cooperation in this semi-enclosed sea has also become impossible. Even worse, possible actions taken by China against Taiwan's controlled Protos Islands and Taiping Islands in the Spratleys have raised serious security concerns. Taiwan's move to join the United States in the implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy in the South China Sea, and more importantly, actions taken by Washington to upgrade diplomatic relations with Taiwan have triggered Beijing's strong responses. In March this year, Taiwan and the United States signed MOU for Coast Guard cooperation. Port called American ships on Protos Islands and Taiping Islands were also speculated. The China administration has adopted the foreign policy position of considering off mainland China, following the United States and Japan, and catering to ASEAN. As a result, Taipei has kept silent with regard to territorial and historical rights claims in the South China Sea. Taipei has adopted low-profile approach in dealing with the South China Sea issues, including unilateral action taken by other claimants and the call to respect or abide by the 2016 arbitration award. In Taiwan, scholars like me have urged the China administration to do more in the South China Sea, but the China administration has adopted that kind of low-profile approach. And since July 2016, Taiwan's South China Sea policy has been implemented in accordance with the 4 principles and 5 action plans. The policy calls for Taiwan to be included in multilateral mechanism that aimed at resolving dispute in the South China Sea. However, without China's consent and the improvement of the cross-strait relations, it is unlikely for Taiwan to participate in the South China Sea security dialogues. Therefore, it can be said that the Tsai administration failed to achieve the goal of this plan of action. However, efforts taken by Taiwan to increase international scientific collaboration and making Taiping Islands a center of humanitarian assistance and rescue can be considered making some progress. It is possible for international and domestic researchers to conduct marine scientific research on Taiping Islands because accommodation facility and landing docks for larger ships on the island will become available soon. At the same time, Taiwan has taken actions to reinforce defense capability on the Protos Island and Taiping Island by sending military troops and upgrading military weapons. The South China Sea issues has never been put on top of Taiwan's South China policy agenda under the Tsai Ing-wen administration. However, if pushed harder by the Biden administration, US-Taiwan cooperation in the South China Sea would trigger China's strong reaction against Taiwan, which include military action targeting at Pratas Island and Taiping Island. This is the matter that the Thai government must handle with care. And my final point is that I agree with Dr. Yang Li that there are many things happen since the book published. So many things, new things, challenges after the new Biden administration. Maybe during our discussion, we can cover that. For example, European, EU, UK, Germany, and recent Biden's freedom navigation operation, a lot. And I think my time is up. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hue. You are, and one other panelist made this point about most recent developments, and of course that's always the challenge, as Nong and Scott and I know. The timelines for book creation mean inevitably there's going to be a few things that could not be covered, and as you intimate, we can, though of course, address those here. I'd also like to remind the attendees to use the chat function, please, to funnel questions to the panelists. You can either identify which person, if not, we'll simply assign it. But I'd like to take the privilege of the moderator to follow up on one point, which was raised by quite eloquently, I thought, by Stan Tonenson, which you basically put to Scott, I believe. But I'd also like to invite Yang Li to respond, and that is, if I understand it, I'm just going to recapitulate it, that a forward position on these issues may make military or security sense, but may have an alienating effect in terms of soft power. It's maybe not correct assumption, but I wonder, Scott, if you could start off responding to that query from that was related to the salami slicing approach, whether it did not have some self-limiting dimensions. And then I'd invite Yang Li to add comments after you speak, Scott, please.
I think Scott, we lost him because he has an issue with Wi-Fi. I don't see he.
That's unfortunate. Well, if he reappears, we'll put that to him. I'd like to then ask Yang Li, what is your take on the comment from our Norwegian colleague that some of the approaches of China may make perhaps strategic or military sense, but may be alienating in terms of soft power? It's a tough question, not easy to answer, but could you comment, please, on that assertion?
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah, I think this is a quite tough question. And also, maybe if I understand the question right, it is implied that China is alienating or isolating itself by using this kind of a salami slicing strategy. And it is not good for China to raise its soft power. I think that is the question asked. And first of all, I don't think there's kind of because this kind of a salami slicing strategy, maybe this kind of a is kind of an invented term that maybe not capture the whole truth of China's strategies toward the South China Sea. Maybe there's kind of a truth in that. I think China does not want a war or major conflicts with either the major world powers or with other claimant states. So every measures that China is taking, I think China is there's a kind of intention that China does not want those confrontations or those competitions escalating into a military conflict. But I don't think that China has a kind of a single grand design behind that strategy. I think China's many of China's policies and behavior in the South China Sea, as far as the South China Sea is concerned, is reactive in nature or defensive in nature. And one of the major objectives is that China wants to safeguard its positions regarding the territorial sovereignty as well as maritime rights in these disputes or under these disputes, because there's disputes. So China, as one of the claimant states, is doing what other claimants are supposed to do, try to preserve its own positions, either through diplomatic actions or other maneuvers on the sea, but of course short of war. And also by alienating itself from other countries, I don't think that China is seeking alliance, because China is a country that holds a long alliance policy, a foreign policy. So China is not seeking allies. But China right now, I think the mainstream of its foreign policy is to seek friends and partners. So I think China, what China is doing is that on one hand, it acknowledges the existence of disputes. And those disputes have to be dealt with in a kind of very cautious manner. If they're not to be resolved in the near future, but they can be managed or put under control through this kind of like COC negotiations, and also positively through practical maritime cooperations. On the other hand, China does not want this kind of disputes or confrontations affect its normal relationship, and especially partnerships with other countries. So maybe this kind of alienating the disputes from the normal relationship. I think this is one of the endeavors by China trying to achieve this kind of ideal scenario. But maybe to China's frustration is that some of China's intentions were maybe misread or misperceived. So maybe maybe my suggestion to other countries that maybe they could try to help China in in better communicating with other countries, and try to realize or materialize this kind of twin goals. I think that will be good for the regional order and the security. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Yang Li. I have another question. Of course, we will open up to, I'd like to see the panelists pose some questions to each other, but I'd like to put one question to John Callahan, who spoke about this, I guess, decade-long or longer pivot, rebalancing, etc. And I'm not certainly no expert on U.S. military deployments. However, it is my impression that the resources devoted to the pivot or the rebalancing, whatever you wish to call it, even with this new announcement involving Australia and the UK, are still very modest compared to what is being devoted, say, to the Middle East or certainly to Europe. Is that the case? And am I accurate in that? Or is there a trend line towards a sharper or more significant percentage of U.S. overseas deployment expenditures being allotted to the Western Pacific?
So thank you for the question. I think there's a couple of angles to it. I think the intention was to actually, when it was back in 2011, 2010, was to actually draw down Europe but also especially the Middle East, to reallocate forces to the Pacific. And obviously it didn't really happen that way. And not just because of the Arab Spring, but because of Russian revanchism also. U.S. European Command had to change from being a command that primarily did security cooperation and exercises to actually being like a military warfighting command again. And that was a pretty big shock to the military system, I think. But I think one level of this is it depends what service you're in. If you're in the Army, then you're Europe focused or the Middle East focused. And I think to some extent the Air Force also. The Pacific, since 1898 has primarily been perceived as Department of the Navy country. And for the Marine Corps especially, their primary deployment area has been the Pacific since 1918. Anecdotally, there are reasons why the Marines were not in Europe, and they're all related to things that happened in World War I when the Marines were in Europe, and the Army decided sort of never again. But the Marine Corps in particular has always maintained the bulk of its forces sort of postured toward the Pacific, in California, in Okinawa, and then stepping back, getting some more strategic depth for Okinawa by expanding to Guam and Australia. So percentages I can't give, but I think that the perception of what's now Indo-PACOM instead of just PACOM as a sort of frontline command, I think it's really there for the U.S. And so just to recap, I think it's intention, and I think it depends what service you're in as to how that looks. I hope that answered your question. I'm happy to refine it with follow-ups.
No, you certainly did, John, and you added some complexity to it in terms of which arm of service one's speaking about. We knew the Navy was well deployed there. The point about the Marines is well taken, and I understand that this thrust may not be finished. I also comprehend that the reason for retaining so many forces in Europe, given the difficulties with Russia. Understood.
And if I just thought of something else too, I find it sort of ironic that just in the last few weeks, in the last few days, Germany has been accused of being a violator of the region by sending one of their heaviest ships, I think a frigate, into the South China Sea. So now they're all over the papers, and I think it's no coincidence either that the Queen Elizabeth's first major deployment saw a engagement in the South China Sea. So yeah.
Good point. External to region participation growing, particularly from Europe, is a good point, and others may wish to pitch in on that. You'll seen, to all the panelists, you've seen a note in the chat aimed at panelists that you are free to query each other. I'll keep just maybe a loose handle on this, but I want to take full advantage that we have all this talent here. There is one question which caught my eye, originating from an exchange between Stein and Hue. If Taiwan begins to shift to a position closer to that of the U.S. and Japan in the South China Sea, the security threat against the Pratas Islands and the Taiping Islands would increase. I wonder if I could invite each of you, well, Stein and Hue, to just expand on that slightly, please.
Yes, I have seen a change historically from a time when you didn't necessarily need to include analysis of Taiwan in an analysis of the South China Sea disputes, because Taiwan basically held the same position as mainland China legally. And it was very careful to maintain its relations with China and not to confront China in relation to the islands it occupies in the Spratlys, Taiping Dao, or Ituaba, and the Pratas Island group. Many people who work on the South China Sea are not even aware of the Pratas Islands, or were not aware until last year, when we started having the speculation about the possible invasion of Pratas. And this means now that we as scholars, when we analyze the conflicts in the South China Sea, we must take Taiwan continuously into consideration, because it's now moved into a position where it faces some of the same dilemmas as the other countries in balancing its moves between confronting China and becoming aligned too much with China. I can recognize some of the concerns that I've seen in Vietnam and the Philippines over the years. And then Sonya Hue has his worry as Taiwanese, which he can expand upon, that the current government's, the Tsai Ing-wen's regime's government's policy increases the danger for Taiwan. And the big question to consider when we discuss the future security of the South China Sea is, what would United States and its allies do if China occupied Taiwanese-held territory in Pratas Islands or in the Spratlys?
Thank you. Yan Hui, could you make a brief comment? And then I will go, after your comment, I will then go to Nong and then invite Rommel to speak to the question that was posed by John about changes in Manila's position regarding the upcoming elections. But first, please to Yan Hui and then Nong.
Well, thank you, Stein. I think I agreed with your analysis and remarks. And many scholars who are concerned about the South China Sea situations have expressed that kind of concern, that if Taiwan move closer and closer to US position and action taken in the South China Sea, and the security threat, military threat in the Taiwan Strait and in the South China Sea will increase for sure. But for Taiwan's national interests and security interests, I suggest to take the Haitian approach. So not too close to the United States, but at the same time, try to talk with the mainland China. Although we know that right now it's very difficult. But the good thing is that we have new election for KMT chairmanship. And Xi Jinping, President Xi, sent message to the new KMT chairman, Zhu Lilun. So that might leave the good way for improvement of cross-strait relations in the future. And the KMT might have the chance to influence the DPP to change its position not too close to the United States. And we know that it's not easy. And then there are another question about the military sale from Biden. I think that's from Jessica Martin, the question number 3. In my view, both Trump's administration and Biden's administration's South China Sea policy and Taiwan's policy remain the same. When we study and observe the new Biden administration with regard to its South China Sea policy, at that time we thought, and we were wrong. We thought the Biden administration would take a softened approach, but we were wrong. Actually, the Biden administration was taking stronger action with regard to phone-ups. You see the number of phone-ups taken by Biden administration and it increasing. But no matter what the Biden administration will continue to sell the military arms to Taiwan and will try to increase the cooperation with Taiwan. But at the same time, right now we see the release of the Ms. Fang, the Huawei's lady, and which also the talk between China, the talk between Xi Jinping and Biden, which give us a hint that Taiwan might be in a difficult position if Beijing and Washington move to a situation to improve its bilateral relations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to Nong now, please. Nong or Flor.
Thank you, Gordon. I want to discuss with Rommel because you're talking about the Philippines perspective. Maybe you can also share with us, looking through the ASEAN's perspective, how the ASEAN countries or as a region view the external stakeholders' increasing presence in the region. So on the one hand, there we're seeing more and more, like for instance, like in August, we see the Quad drill from Guam. It's make the media cover a lot, and now the recent outcry, as you just mentioned. My understanding, my definition about the development in the South China Sea may be different from some external countries' view on that. So they define the South China Sea as a tension. However, I do see a lot of ongoing efforts among the claimants, bilateral or trilateral, in terms of confidence building and Coast Guard confidence building. So, and from the Philippine perspective and also from ASEAN perspective, for instance, one of the common entry for external players' interests, well, in addition to like helping allies, etc., the freedom navigation is one common trend that usually would like to refer to justify their increasing presence in this region. But do you see like other countries like Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and do they see the freedom navigation is really an issue in this region? And how do you define, for instance, the development in the South China Sea from an ASEAN perspective? And the question is, anyone, any of the authors is welcome to comment on this.
Can I answer now, Gordon?
Please go ahead, Rommel.
Yes.
And then, as Nong indicated, others may want to pitch in on this particular point. Go ahead, please.
Well, the general perception of ASEAN members is that the region should not be the playground of major power competition. So we have different ways of relating with major powers, but at the same time, we don't want major powers to really affect the dynamics of security relationship among Southeast Asian states. And as much as possible, they don't want to see major powers using any members of ASEAN as pawns in their ongoing major power competition. So ASEAN is pursuing the policy of productively and constructively engaging all major powers, with a caveat that when it comes to the shaping of regional security architecture, there must be the centrality of ASEAN. But of course, the problem of the centrality of ASEAN is the forging of the unity among ASEAN members. So we have our own national policy outlook in dealing with major powers, but when we talk as members of ASEAN, we uphold the ASEAN outlook of making ASEAN as the central figure in shaping the security architecture of the region and even in the management of disputes. When it comes to the Philippines, we also uphold the ASEAN centrality, okay? And we also have difficulties in managing our major power relationship. But the trend among countries in Southeast Asia, and that includes the Philippines, is that our economic orientation has shifted towards China now. You know, the Philippines, even Singapore, who is critical of China, is also whose economy is oriented towards China, and even Vietnam. But at the same time, we also have the security predicaments that ASEAN cannot address. So we invite major powers to address the China challenge on the security aspect. So economic-wise, we want productive engagement with China, but we have a problem engaging China on the security aspect because of the asymmetric relationship. So it is in that context that we invite the involvement of major powers. Yeah.
Thank you, Rommel. Perhaps others might wish to comment on the Philippine question or Rommel's comments. And following that, I notice that Stein has put another question to Rommel, but perhaps first, are there others who wish on the panel who wish to comment on what's been and what either Rommel said or the question to him from Nong? And if not, I wonder, Rommel, if you could answer the chat question that's been put to you by Stein. You could probably read it faster. But for the benefit of others, I'll read it just in very simple terms. This is from Stein. China could score a major victory by recognizing Philippines' sovereign rights in the Reed Bank. Then the Philippines would no doubt be more than happy to develop a joint venture. But any Philippine president agreeing to joint development with China without prior recognition of the Philippines' sovereign rights would face a risk of being accused of treason. Is that correct, Rommel? And will this be an issue of the upcoming election campaign? Over to you, Rommel, to respond, please.
Yes, our approach towards the South China Sea is largely shaped by domestic considerations. Even though the government wants comprehensive engagement with China, the problem is that the general perception in the Philippines of the public, there's a strong anti-China attitude, and that affects government approach towards the South China Sea. It will be problematic for the next government if the next government will not have the same popularity like what Duterte is enjoying now. This is the dilemma in the Philippines. China, Duterte is friendly to China, okay, but adopting a pro-China position is unpopular. But Duterte remains to be popular. So that is why he can maneuver to relate with China because of his popularity. However, if we will elect a president next year that is not very popular, then our policy towards China and the South China Sea will largely be dictated by domestic pressures. And even the issue of joint development, as you asked, Stein, from the government perspective, Philippine government is willing to cooperate with China to develop gas and oil in the South China Sea. But when we go back to the details, the public is not supportive of it, and our legal regime is not ready for it. So that slows down the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding for the development of natural gas and oil. So it's always shaped by domestic considerations and existing legal regime in the Philippines. Now, will Duterte continue his legacy in May 2022? This is my prognosis because currently I'm involved in election monitoring. There's a danger for the opposition because there's no united opposition. So there's a strong likelihood that a pro-Duterte government will be elected again in May 2022 unless something happens between now and then. One of the strong contenders is Bongbong Marcos, the son of the former dictator, and Bongbong Marcos is following the China-friendly policy of Duterte, especially that the mother, Imelda Marcos, was responsible for the crafting of friendly relationship with China. But if the opposition, led by the Liberal Party, will win the election in 2022, then there will be a major change in the approach because the Liberal Party will uphold the arbitration case and of course will pursue a rule-based approach in the South China Sea, and therefore it will be very difficult for China to pursue cooperation with the Philippines unless China follows the existing Philippine legal regime.
Thank you, Rommel. I just on one particular point that was raised by Stein, I believe. Yes, I'd like to put this question to Yang Li. Stein had written, China could score a major victory by recognizing the Philippines' sovereign rights in the Reed Bank. Then there could be joint development. A question for you, Yang Li. What are really the prospects that this could occur, that China would accept Philippine sovereignty in the Reed Bank? Over to you, please.
Thank you, Gordon. So the question is about the prospect of China-Philippines cooperation Reed Bank. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think what Stein had also intimated could China accept the sovereign claims of Philippines vis-a-vis the Reed Bank, or I mean, answer this as you wish. You may feel that it's more likely that there could be the cooperation without such an action. But I guess the specific question from Stein was, would or could or should China accept Philippine claims vis-a-vis the Reed Bank? Over.
I think for Reed Bank, because China thinks that Reed Bank is part of the separated islands, and but the Philippines they think that Reed Bank is not part of the separated and it's on the continental shelf of the Philippines because it is within the 200 nautical mile of the Philippines. So this kind of a legal dispute and. But anyway, this legal disputes, I don't think it will be settled in the foreseeable future. So that the best way for China and the Philippines is that they put aside this kind of disputes and seek practical cooperation. And actually, it happened back in 2005 to 2008 when the China, Philippines, and Vietnam national oil companies. They have conducted joint seismic undertakings in this area. So that I think we can copy this successful story. But I understand that there are some maybe domestic difficulties in the Philippines. There are different voices, and also maybe there are some maybe constitutional restraints, but I think it requires kind of political wisdom to push this process forward. And but the key issue is that maybe both sides have to be aware that these kind of legal positions maybe there's no room for either side to back down, so that maybe the two sides have to pay their efforts to find a middle way. That's my observation on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll just maybe give one further short opportunity for Rommel to hot pursuit to reply to that. You mentioned in your chat function there that this is a red line, the Reed Bank, and then we'll turn to Surma Gupta. Rommel, please.
Yes, the Reed Bank is one of the red lines in Philippines-China relations, and the Philippines is pursuing a hard line position on the Reed Bank. Internally, among military establishments and security establishments, we cannot allow Reed Bank to be like Mischief Reef and Scarborough Shoal. So when China pursues unilateral actions in the Reed Bank, we will be forced to also retaliate, okay? Because we don't want a repeat of the Mischief Reef and Scarborough Shoal again. And that is the reason why the Philippines is strengthening its existing security alliance with the United States, and also negotiating for a status of forces agreement with Japan, and implementing the status of forces agreement with Australia, because of Philippine intention to have the stronger capability to defend three major areas, okay, that we don't want to be lost again: Reed Bank, what we call the Ayungin Shoal, or the second Thomas Shoal, and San Kay, the sandbar between Subi Reef and Pag-asa Island. The Philippines is preparing to defend it no matter what, because especially Reed Bank, because Reed Bank will be the source of our energy requirements in the next 25 years, especially with the depletion of Malampaya. And right now, when it comes to the Reed Bank, the Philippines is also doing other things beyond the memorandum of understanding. In fact, we have opened the contract to other players than China. Okay. And we are just waiting for China's reaction on that. But I know that China is very furious about that action from the Philippines. But if China will act militarily in the Reed Bank, the Philippines will also act militarily. And we might invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. And that is why we are talking with the United States to have greater clarification on its commitment to defend the Philippines. Okay? We want a clarity on the extent of American commitment to defend the Philippines, and what we have in mind is the defense of the Reed Bank, because we are ready to develop the Reed Bank to meet our current and future energy requirements.
Thank you, Rommel. I'm going to Saurabh Gupta, and then I'd like to go to John Callahan again to comment on what Rommel just said about the strengthening or clarifying the U.S. commitment vis-a-vis the Philippines. Saurabh Gupta, please.
Thanks, Gordon. Gordon, I just wanted to make one overarching comment, which, with regard to the geopolitics of the South China Sea, which we even see in this discussion right out here. And that overarching comment is that, you know, the claimant states are consumed by the territoriality related issues and the legal issues, while the external players, particularly the big external players, understand that the import of the legal issues from a fundamental international law and global good order at sea perspective, but they are not consumed. I mean, aside from navigating through the South China Sea, and their fundamental the fundamental issues that consume them, or that they are focused on, is with regard to contingencies outside the South China Sea, to which the South China Sea may be linked, for example, a Taiwan Straits crisis and therefore Pratas Islands, and of course, with regard to something in the East China Sea, which it might impact Japan. And they're also consumed or worried about with regard to China's force projection capabilities, given its reclamation on the artificial islands. And I think it's in this conversation and also in general geopolitics, it's this dichotomy between what consumes the people in that area and what the external actors are more concerned about, which is not entirely aligned, which I think, frankly, is something which just ensures that there's a lot of talk which happens with regard to these issues, but that does not exactly translate into any concrete action per se. And I just wanted to throw that observation out, because I also see that to some extent in the context of our conversation here.
Thank you, sir. But perhaps a brief comment from John, and then I'd like to turn to some of the Q&A questions from the attendees. John, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think just quickly, that I think the U.S. is walking a line of between antagonism, but also a desire to rekindle relationships, especially with the Philippines. And I think it fits into the overall, the Quad and the overall U.S. actions in the region. So yeah, it's a simple answer. I think definitely the U.S. is interested.
Thank you. And before I go to the first question for the Q&A, I must admit I appreciated Stein's comment to the panelists. He wrote that it was said by several that no book can be fully updated, and that's clearly true. On the other hand, if we base our analysis just on running news, our understanding becomes extremely shallow. But actually reading the whole book will require a deeper understanding. Thank you for that kind comment, Stein. A question here from Stephen Smith, and I'm going to read it. A recent article in Foreign Policy, September 24th, a few days ago, by Hal Brands and Michael Beckley, argues that China is in fact a declining power, which makes it more dangerous than it might overreach and use military force to try and reclaim Taiwan before the US and Taiwan have time to adjust more fully to potential military threats. What the panelists think about this? And perhaps I might just in order of time, we'll see how much time we have. I'd go quickly to John, and then perhaps to Hue, please.
Absolutely. There's no more dangerous power than a declining power, and managing that decline is critical. Of course, a big chunk of the world thinks the U.S. is declining too, and that should be managed. So I don't know how those mutual managing, but those mutual issues will play out. But if the indicators really are that China is declining, then absolutely predictability and other issues become a big deal. We've seen it before in history. So,
well, certainly, I think we will all read that article. I haven't as yet, but please. And Hue, would you like to add something to that point? Given the Taiwan was specifically mentioned.
I'm not sure about the comment about the declining China. Actually, it's rising China. It's getting more powerful, ambitious, and has the capability to do many things. And with regard to Taiwan's issues, and that's one of the core interests. So China would take more action to defend that position if the United States cross the red lines. We know that Wang Yi said that there are 3 red lines between the United States and China, and one of them is territorial integrity, including the Taiwan issues. But the question say that China's declining power, so that will become more dangerous to reclaim Taiwan. In my view, the possibility for that action depends upon Taiwan's Tsai Ing-wen government's policy. If the Tsai Ing-wen governments move closer, more and more to Taiwan independence, that will increase the possibility for reclaiming of Taiwan by Beijing. But the good thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, President Xi Jinping sent the congratulating message to the new KMT chairmanship. And the new KMT's policy is to stop moving toward independence. And that's the consensus. More and more people are concerned, are aware of the dangers of that kind of development in Taiwan. So that's my remark. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I must say that I have not read that article in Foreign Policy, which I will do. The consensus broadly seems to be that it's of a rising China, not a declining China, but I will make a point. Others, I'm sure, will now read that article. A quick, Taiwan is a popular theme here. Question from Jessica Martin, I'll read. Is noted the Biden administration's Taiwan policy, especially with regard to maritime navigation, has not changed much from the Trump administration's own Taiwan policy. How accurate is it to perceive the Biden administration military sales to Taiwan and the unofficial delegation sent in April as an overall sign for the administration's long-term Taiwan policy? I'd like to ask perhaps both John to make a short comment, but I'd also like something perhaps from Yang Li briefly to those 2 questions. We still have some time, but we're getting close to the end. So brief comments only, please, from John. And
absolutely. I'll be very brief. And God, it's such a cop-out, but we have to see, right? It's the beginning of new actions or a new trend of actions. And I don't know. There's one where the analyst wouldn't want to stake his life on the suggestion. So we'll have to see.
Yang Li.
Thank you. And my comment is that I think actually there's kind of a potential danger that the situations in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea will have some kind of, a mutually reinforcing effect as long as the strategic competition between China and the United States is escalating. so that maybe it is I think maybe so. It is very crucial for the two sides to keep kind of strategic dialogue to try to manage this kind of situation. That's my brief comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have two last questions. I'd like to get them both done from the attendees, and one is from Alec Caravana. I'll read it. China's new maritime law, in which foreign vessels are requested to submit details to Chinese authorities when transiting its territorial waters, has now come into force. How do you believe that implementation of this law will impact China's relationship with ASEAN and the development of the code of conduct overall? Perhaps I'd ask Nong very briefly, and then well, let's see if Nong, please respond to that, and what do you think, please?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, the China's maritime police law does not come as a sudden. It has represented a long process for China's Coast Guard after its reconstruction of law enforcement agencies back in 2013. It took many years to formulate this marine policy law. So the purpose of use of force by coastal guard is to take measures against ships suspected of serious violation of laws and disobedience of orders. And then an interpretation follows principle of minimum use of force. And it's not conceived to encourage the use of force in combat. And second, it's a globally common practice for coast guards to authorize maritime law enforcement personnel to use force on foreign vessels. For example, they're looking in the kind of East Asia. We have Japan's revised Coast Guard law in 2001, South Korea relevant announcement in 2016. And another point I want to make is, I think the concern, I see the concern raised by the audience from this on this question is about the relations between China and ASEAN, how other countries view the capacity of China's Coast Guard. And then I think very importantly from the Chinese perspective to ease this anxiety, because we have this pending maritime delimitation. We don't know where exactly that jurisdiction should follow into which country's law enforcement jurisdiction. So China, I think, should demonstrate greater political will to engage with other regional maritime law enforcement agencies in order to minimize the risk of incident at sea. Yeah, I'm going to stop here.
Thanks, Nong. We're just going rapid fire responses here, trying to wrap things up. Quick question here from Bill Hayton. Question to you, Nong, and to Yang Li. Does the Chinese leadership care what people think about its behavior in South China Sea? Does it matter if Beijing's actions are unpopular in Jakarta or Kuala Lumpur? Perhaps first to Yang Li and then to Nong.
Thank you. This question is kind of tough, but actually, I think it depends on the nature of the question. As far as the disputes are concerned, I think Chinese leadership, the main concern of Chinese leadership is to preserve China's legal positions. So that because this kind of things is because the relevant countries have divergent or even conflicting views of points, so that there's no room for one country to appease the other side. But at the same time, as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned, I think Chinese leadership is very keen to garner support from the people of the other country, that to convince the people from the other country that China is really interested in forming a friendly and amicable relationship with the country concerned, notwithstanding the existing disputes. And those disputes could be successfully managed, and maybe it could be turned into an opportunity of cooperation. So that's my remark. Thank you.
Thank you. Nong, would you like to add something?
Very quick, I think the South China Sea dispute has existed for decades. I think all the claimants, they they're trying to work together either bilaterally or trilaterally or multilaterally to manage the dispute. So on the one hand, you will see like small scale of conflict among the claimant, but on the other hand, I think it's worth noting there's ongoing lots of maritime cooperation projects ongoing, which involve all these countries. I consider that's a very successful, conducive capacity building and also confidence building measures in order to keep the regional order and stability under control.
Thank you. And the last question, and I'm not sure who to put this to, so I'll just ask a panelist perhaps to pitch in. Will Vietnam, this is from Lam Chong Hua, will Vietnam bring the territorial dispute or 9-line question to the arbitration of international court? I just invite one of our panelists to pitch in on that question of Vietnam's intentions. We don't have a Vietnamese panelist, but please, would one of you give me an opinion, please, give us an opinion on that point?
If nobody, I can say a few words.
Yeah, please.
Oh, okay. Dr. Song, your floor.
Okay.
Thank
You
you.
are one of the very few lawyers in this.
Thank you. I think, Vietnam is in that preparations to bring the dispute to the court arbitration tribunal. But political consideration is more important than legal consideration at the moment. And the relationship between Hanoi and Beijing is more important, especially party-to-party relationship. So that possibility is there, but not big. But in my personal opinion, is that possible for China to bring the disputes with the United States to court in the future, which means for Beijing to consider to adopt the legal approach to resolve the disputes with the United States, for example, freedom navigation operation or a flight, or that kind of dispute regarding the mischief reef, territorial sea, and even the two law. We mentioned that marine traffic law and Coast Guard law and so on. So legal approach might be a good approach for Beijing to consider to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I agree with Nong. It's good to have a position from a lawyer, an opinion from a lawyer here. Nong, do you want to add anything? And that will be the last word before we turn back to Jia Wang on the Vietnam.
Sure, I agree with Dr. Liu. And about your question, whether in the future will China and the US go to a court, I think it will be a very good topic for our next book project. But very quickly, I think in terms of the free navigation, if we define a military activity and probably China has already included by its declaration in 2006 to exclude military activities from going to a third-party court.
Thank you for that clarification, Nong. And I would like now, we've reached the end of our Q&A session. I'd like to turn the table, the gavel back to Wang Jia, please.
Thank you, Gordon. That was truly an illuminating discussion we just had, and there's just so much expertise and many varied perspectives, and the China Institute will continue to bringing you more discussions like this and on this very important topic on the security and other governing issues of the South China Sea. So just a final few words of thanks. Thank you all. First of all, to all our speakers for sharing your insights, and a special thanks to those calling in from Asia. It's very late up there, so thank you so much for staying up late into the night to be part of this discussion today. I would also like to thank our colleagues at the China Institute and ICAS for organizing this webinar. And finally, a big thanks to all the audience members for attending and for sending your questions. Please stay tuned for more events the China Institute is planning in the coming months. Enjoy the rest of your day.